Verse 26. The means of destruction of ignorance is unbroken practice of discrimination. This is the real goal of practice, discrimination between the real and the unreal, knowing that the Purusha is not nature, that it is neither matter nor mind, and that because it is not nature, it cannot possibly change. It is only nature that changes, combining and recombining, dissolving continually. When, through constant practice, we begin to discriminate, ignorance will vanish, and the Purusha will begin to shine in its real nature, omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent. Verse 27. His knowledge is of the sevenfold highest ground. When this knowledge comes, it will come as it were in 7 grades, one after the other, and when one of these begins, we know that we are getting knowledge. The first to appear will be that we have known what is to be known. The mind will cease to be dissatisfied. While we are aware of thirsting after knowledge, we begin to seek here and there, wherever we think we can get some truth, and failing to find it, we become dissatisfied and seek in a fresh direction. All search is vain until we begin to perceive that knowledge is within ourselves, that no one can help us, that we must help ourselves. When we begin to practice the power of discrimination, the first sign that we are getting near truth will be that that dissatisfied state will vanish. We shall feel quite sure that we have found the truth, and that it cannot be anything else but the truth. Then we may know that the sun is rising, that the morning is breaking for us, and taking courage, we must persevere until the goal is reached. The second grade will be the absence of all pains. It will be impossible for anything in the universe, external or internal, to give us pain. The third will be the attainment of full knowledge. Omniscience will be ours. The fourth will be the attainment of the end of all duty through discrimination. Next will come what is called freedom of the chitta. We shall realize that all difficulties and struggles, all vacillations of the mind, have fallen down, just as a stone rolls from the mountain top into the valley and never comes up again. The next will be that the chitta itself will realize that it melts away into its causes whenever we so desire. Lastly, we shall find that we are established in ourself, that we have been alone throughout the universe. Neither body nor mind was ever related, much less joined to us. They were working their own way, and we, through ignorance, joined ourselves to them. But we have been alone, omnipotent, omnipresent, ever blessed. Our own self was so pure and perfect that we required none else. We required none else to make us happy, for we are happiness itself. We shall find that this knowledge does not depend on anything else. Throughout the universe, there can be nothing that will not become effulgent before our knowledge. This will be the last state, and the yogi will become peaceful and calm, never to feel any more pain, never to be again deluded, never to be touched by misery. He will know he is ever blessed, ever perfect, almighty. Verse 28. By the practice of the different parts of yoga, the impurities being destroyed, knowledge becomes effulgent up to discrimination. Now comes the practical knowledge. What we have just been speaking about is much higher. It is away above our heads, but it is the ideal. It is first necessary to obtain physical and mental control. Then the realization will become steady in that ideal. The ideal being known, what remains is to practice the method of reaching it. Verse 29. Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, and Samadhi are the 8 limbs of yoga. Verse 30. Non-killing, truthfulness, non-stealing, continence, and non-receiving are called yama. A man who wants to be a perfect yogi must give up the sex idea. The soul has no sex. Why should it degrade itself with sex ideas? Later on, we shall understand better why these ideas must be given up. The mind of the man who receives gifts is acted on by the mind of the giver, so the receiver is likely to become degenerated. Receiving gifts is prone to destroy the independence of the mind and make us slavish. Therefore, receive no gifts. Verse 31. These, unbroken by time, place, purpose, and caste rules, are universal great vows. These practices, non-killing, truthfulness, non-stealing, chastity, and non-receiving, are to be practiced by every man, woman, and child, by every soul, irrespective of nation, country, or position. Verse 32. Internal and external purification, contentment, mortification, study, and worship of God are the niyamas. External purification is keeping the body pure. A dirty man will never be a yogi. There must be internal purification also. That is obtained by the virtues named in chapter 1, verse 33. Of course, internal purity is of greater value than external, but both are necessary, and external purity without internal is of no good. Verse 33. To obstruct thoughts which are inimical to yoga, contrary thoughts should be brought. That is the way to practice the virtues that have been stated. For instance, when a big wave of anger has come into the mind, how are we to control that? Just by raising an opposing wave. Think of love. Sometimes a mother is very angry with her husband, and while in that state the baby comes in and she kisses the baby. The old wave dies out and a new wave arises, love for the child. That suppresses the other one. Love is opposite to anger. Similarly, when the idea of stealing comes, non-stealing should be thought of. When the idea of receiving gifts comes, replace it by a contrary thought. Verse 34. The obstructions to yoga are killing, falsehood, etc., whether committed, caused, or approved, either through avarice, or anger, or ignorance, whether slight, middling, or great, and they result in infinite ignorance and misery. This is the method of thinking the contrary. If I tell a lie, or cause another to tell one, or approve of another doing so, it is equally sinful. If it is a very mild lie, still it is a lie. Every vicious thought will rebound. Every thought of hatred which you may have thought, in a cave even, is stored up, and will one day come back to you with tremendous power in the form of some misery here. If you project hatred and jealousy, they will rebound on you with compound interest. No power can avert them, when once you have put them in motion, you will have to bear them. Remembering this will prevent you from doing wicked things. Verse 35. Non-killing being established, in his presence all enmities cease in others. If a man gets the ideal of non-injuring others, before him even animals, which are by their nature ferocious, will become peaceful. The tiger and the lamb will play together before that yogi. When you have come to that state, then alone you will understand that you have become firmly established in non-injuring. Verse 36. By the establishment of truthfulness, the yogi gets the power of attaining for himself and others the fruits of work without the works. When this power of truth will be established with you, then even in dream you will never tell an untruth. You will be true in thought, word, and deed. Whatever you say will be truth. You may say to a man, "Be blessed," and that man will be blessed. If a man is diseased and you say to him, "Be thou cured," he will be cured immediately. Verse 37. By the establishment of non-stealing, all wealth comes to the yogi. The more you fly from nature, the more she follows you, and if you do not care for her at all, she becomes your slave. Verse 38. By the establishment of continence, energy is gained. The chaste brain has tremendous energy and gigantic willpower. Without chastity, there can be no spiritual strength. Continence gives wonderful control over mankind. The spiritual leaders of men have been very continent, and this is what gave them power. Therefore, the yogi must be continent. Verse 39. When he is fixed in non-receiving, he gets the memory of past life. When a man does not receive presents, he does not become beholden to others, but remains independent and free. His mind becomes pure. With every gift, he is likely to receive the evils of the giver. If he does not receive, the mind is purified, and the first power it gets is memory of past life. Then alone the yogi becomes perfectly fixed in his ideal. He sees that he has been coming and going many times, so he becomes determined that this time he will be free, that he will no more come and go and be the slave of nature. Verse 40. Internal and external cleanliness being established, arises disgust for one's own body and non-intercourse with others. When there is real purification of the body, external and internal, there arises neglect of the body, and the idea of keeping it nice vanishes. A face which others call most beautiful will appear to the yogi as merely animal if there is not intelligence behind it. What the world calls a very common face, he regards as heavenly if the spirit shines behind it. This thirst after body is the great bane of human life. So the first sign of the establishment of purity is that you do not care to think you are a body. It is only when purity comes that we get rid of the body idea. Verse 41. There also arises purification of the sattva, cheerfulness of the mind, concentration, conquest of the organs, and fitness for the realization of the self. By the practice of cleanliness, the sattva material prevails, and the mind becomes concentrated and cheerful. The first sign that you are becoming religious is that you are becoming cheerful. When a man is gloomy, that may be dyspepsia, but it is not religion. A pleasurable feeling is the nature of the sattva. Everything is pleasurable to the sattvika man, and when this comes, know that you are progressing in yoga. All pain is caused by tamas, so you must get rid of that. Moroseness is one of the results of tamas. The strong, the well-knit, the young, the healthy, the daring alone are fit to be yogis. To the yogi, everything is bliss. Every human face that he sees brings cheerfulness to him. That is the sign of a virtuous man. Misery is caused by sin, and by no other cause. What business have you with clouded faces? It is terrible. If you have a clouded face, do not go out that day. Shut yourself up in your room. What right have you to carry this disease out into the world? When your mind has become controlled, you have control over the whole body. Instead of being a slave to this machine, the machine is your slave. Instead of this machine being able to drag the soul down, it becomes its greatest helpmate. Verse 42. From contentment comes superlative happiness. Verse 43. The result of mortification is bringing powers to the organs and the body by destroying the impurity. The results of mortification are seen immediately, sometimes by heightened powers of vision, hearing things at a distance, and so on. Verse 44. By the repetition of the mantra comes the realization of the intended deity. The higher the beings that you want to get, the harder is the practice. Verse 45. By sacrificing all to Ishvara comes samadhi. By resignation to the Lord, samadhi becomes perfect. Verse 46. Posture is that which is firm and pleasant. Now comes asana, or posture. Until you can get a firm seat, you cannot practice the breathing and other exercises. Firmness of seat means that you do not feel the body at all. In the ordinary way, you will find that as soon as you sit for a few minutes, all sorts of disturbances come into the body. But when you have got beyond the idea of a concrete body, you will lose all sense of the body. You will feel neither pleasure nor pain, and when you take your body up again, it will feel so rested. It is the only perfect rest that you can give to the body. When you have succeeded in conquering the body and keeping it firm, your practice will remain firm. But while you are disturbed by the body, your nerves become disturbed, and you cannot concentrate the mind. Verse 47. By lessening the natural tendency for restlessness and meditating on the unlimited, posture becomes firm and pleasant. We can make the seat firm by thinking of the infinite. We cannot think of the absolute infinite, but we can think of the infinite sky. Verse 48. Seat being conquered, the dualities do not obstruct. The dualities, good and bad, heat and cold, and all the pairs of opposites will not then disturb you. Verse 49. Controlling the motion of the exhalation and the inhalation follows after this. When posture has been conquered, then the motion of the prana is to be broken and controlled. Thus we come to pranayama, the controlling of the vital forces of the body. Prana is not breath, though it is usually so translated. It is the sum total of the cosmic energy. It is the energy that is in each body, and its most apparent manifestation is the motion of the lungs. This motion is caused by prana drawing in the breath, and it is what we seek to control in pranayama. We begin by controlling the breath as the easiest way of getting control of the prana. Verse 50. Its modifications are either external or internal, or motionless, regulated by place, time, and number, either long or short. The three sorts of motion of pranayama are one by which we draw the breath in, another by which we throw it out, and the third action is when the breath is held in the lungs or stopped from entering the lungs. These again are varied by place and time. By place is meant that the prana is held to some particular part of the body. By time is meant how long the prana should be confined to a certain place. And so we are told how many seconds to keep one motion and how many seconds to keep another. The result of this pranayama is udghata, awakening the kundalini. Verse 51. The fourth is restraining the prana by reflecting on external or internal objects. This is the fourth sort of pranayama in which the kumbhaka, or retention of breath, is brought about by long practice attended with reflection, which is absent in the other three. Verse 52. From that, the covering to the light of the citta is attenuated. The citta has, by its own nature, all knowledge. It is made of sattva particles, but is covered by rajas and tamas particles, and by pranayama this covering is removed. Verse 53. The mind becomes fit for dharana. After this covering has been removed, we are able to concentrate the mind. Verse 54. The drawing in of the organs is by their giving up their own objects and taking the form of the mind stuff. The organs are separate states of the mind stuff. I see a book. The form is not in the book, it is in the mind. Something is outside which calls that form up. The real form is in the citta. The organs identify themselves with and take the forms of whatever comes to them. If you can restrain the mind stuff from taking these forms, the mind will remain calm. This is called pratyahara. Verse 55. Thence arises supreme control of the organs. When the yogi has succeeded in preventing the organs from taking the forms of external objects and in making them remain one with the mind stuff, then comes perfect control of the organs. When the organs are perfectly under control, every muscle and nerve will be under control, because the organs are the centers of all the sensations and of all actions. These organs are divided into organs of work and organs of sensation. When the organs are controlled, the yogi can control all feeling and doing. The whole of the body comes under his control. Then alone one begins to feel joy in being born. Then one can truthfully say, "Blessed am I that I was born." When that control of the organs is obtained, we feel how wonderful this body really is. Chapter 3. Powers. We have now come to the chapter in which the yoga powers are described. Verse 1. Dharana is holding the mind onto some particular object. Dharana, or concentration, is when the mind holds on to some object, either in the body or outside the body, and keeps itself in that state. Verse 2. An unbroken flow of knowledge in that object is dhyana. The mind tries to think of one object to hold itself to one particular spot, as the top of the head, the heart, etc., and if the mind succeeds in receiving the sensations only through that part of the body and through no other part, that would be dharana. And when the mind succeeds in keeping itself in that state for some time, it is called dhyana, or meditation. Verse 3. When that, giving up all forms, reflects only the meaning, it is samadhi. That comes when in meditation the form or the external part is given up. Suppose I were meditating on a book, and that I have gradually succeeded in concentrating the mind on it, and perceiving only the internal sensations, the meaning, unexpressed in any form. That state of dhyana is called samadhi. Verse 4. These three, when practiced in regard to one object, is samyama. When a man can direct his mind to any particular object and fix it there, and then keep it there for a long time, separating the object from the internal part, this is samyama, or dharana, dhyana, and samadhi, one following the other and making one. The form of the thing has vanished, and only its meaning remains in the mind. Verse 5. By the conquest of that comes light of knowledge. When one has succeeded in making this samyama, all powers come under his control. This is the great instrument of the yogi. The objects of knowledge are infinite, and they are divided into the gross, grosser, grossest, and the fine, finer, finest, and so on. This samyama should be first applied to gross things, and when you begin to get knowledge of this gross, slowly, by stages, it should be brought to finer things. Verse 6. That should be employed in stages. This is a note of warning not to attempt to go too fast. Verse 7. These three are more internal than those that precede. Before these, we had the pratyahara, the pranayama, the asana, the yama, and niyama. They are external parts of the three, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. When a man has attained to them, he may attain to omniscience and omnipotence, but that would not be salvation. These three would not make the mind nirvikalpa, changeless, but would leave the seeds for getting bodies again. Only when the seeds are, as the yogi says, fried, do they lose the possibility of producing further plants. These powers cannot fry the seed. Verse 8. But even they are external to the seedless samadhi. Compared with that seedless samadhi, therefore, even these are external. We have not yet reached the real samadhi, the highest, but a lower stage, in which this universe still exists as we see it, and in which are all these powers. Verse 9. By the suppression of the disturbed impressions of the mind, and by the rise of impressions of control, the mind, which persists in that moment of control, is said to attain the controlling modifications. That is to say, in this first state of samadhi, the modifications of the mind have been controlled, but not perfectly, because if they were, there would be no modifications. If there is a modification which impels the mind to rush out through the senses, and the yogi tries to control it, that very control itself will be a modification. One wave will be checked by another wave, so it will not be real samadhi in which all the waves subside, as control itself will be a wave. Yet, this lower samadhi is very much nearer to the higher samadhi than when the mind comes bubbling out. Verse 10. Its flow becomes steady by habit. The flow of this continuous control of the mind becomes steady when practiced day after day, and the mind obtains the faculty of constant concentration. Verse 11. Taking in all sorts of objects and concentrating upon one object, these two powers being destroyed and manifested respectively, the chitta gets the modification called samadhi. The mind takes up various objects, runs into all sorts of things. That is the lower state. There is a higher state of the mind when it takes up one object and excludes all others, of which samadhi is the result. Verse 12. The one-pointedness of the chitta is when the impression that is past and that which is present are similar. How are we to know that the mind has become concentrated? Because the idea of time will vanish. The more time passes unnoticed, the more concentrated we are. In common life, we see that when we are interested in a book, we do not note the time at all. And when we leave the book, we are often surprised to find how many hours have passed. All time will have the tendency to come and stand in the one present. So the definition is given. When the past and present come and stand in one, the mind is said to be concentrated. Verse 13. By this is explained the threefold transformation of form, time, and state, in fine or gross matter and in the organs. By the threefold changes in the mind stuff as to form, time, and state are explained the corresponding changes in gross and subtle matter and in the organs. Suppose there is a lump of gold. It is transformed into a bracelet and again into an earring. These are changes as to form. The same phenomena, looked at from the standpoint of time, give us change as to time. Again, the bracelet or the earring may be bright or dull, thick or thin, and so on. This is change as to state. Now, referring to the aphorisms 9, 11, and 12, the mind stuff is changing into vrittis. This is change as to form. That it passes through past, present, and future moments of time is change as to time. That the impressions vary as to intensity within one particular period, say present, is change as to state. The concentrations taught in the preceding aphorisms were to give the yogi a voluntary control over the transformations of his mind stuff, which alone will enable him to make the samyama named in chapter 3, verse 4.